She stood up in open court and said I was a useless man. Not in those exact words, but that was the meaning of it. At 10:43 on a Wednesday morning in late March, inside Fulton County Family Court, she stood and told the judge, told the whole room, told our two children sitting on the wooden bench directly behind me that throughout our marriage, I had been a man too small for the life she needed, that I had always been a failure, and that I always would be, that our children deserved a father who could actually provide for them instead of one who drove a 12-year-old car and rented a house in East Point and taught 8th grade American history because he couldn't figure out how to do anything else with himself. My daughter was 8 years old. She was wearing a dress her mother had bought her the night before, specifically for this morning. My son was 11. He was staring at his shoes. I sat at the respondent's table in a sport coat I had worn to every parent-teacher conference for the last 4 years, and I did not say a single word. My attorney, a quiet, patient man named Warren Delacroix, 61 years old, former military legal officer, a man who had been watching courtrooms longer than my marriage had existed, glanced at me sideways. Then he looked back at the judge and waited. The judge, the Honorable Miriam Osei Bonsu, had just been handed a single sheet of paper by a court officer. She had not been expecting it. I could tell she hadn't been expecting it, because her hands had gone very still when the officer approached the bench. She read the paper once. She read it again. She set it down. She looked at my ex-wife. She looked at the man sitting behind my ex-wife, a man named Garrison Cole, 52 years old, developer, Mercedes, $4,000 suits, a house in Buckhead that looked like it had been designed to make other houses feel apologetic about themselves. She looked at my two children on the wooden bench. Then she looked at me. She said, "Mr. Hale, I need to ask you something before this court goes any further." I said, "Yes, Your Honor." She said, "Mr. Hale, does your family know why the Department of Defense has had an open search file on you for the last 26 years? I closed my eyes. I didn't answer for a long moment. I had been waiting for that question. Not in a courtroom. Not on a Wednesday morning in Atlanta while my ex-wife was still standing 2 feet away from me trying to take my children. But I had been waiting for that question for 26 years. And the strange thing, the thing I have never been able to fully explain to anyone, was that when it finally came, something in my chest went quiet. Like a sound I had been living with so long I had stopped hearing it had simply stopped. I said, "Your Honor, they do not. Honestly, I need to pause here for a second, because I know what this sounds like from the outside. It sounds like the setup to something cinematic, a man in a bad sport coat, a sealed government document, a judge with a federal courier's signature on her bench. I get it. But I need you to understand something before I keep going. I am not telling you this story because I want you to think I am some kind of hero. I am telling you this story because, for 26 years, the people who were supposed to know me best looked at me and saw a man who had wasted himself. And I never said a word. Not one. And I need you to understand what that costs. So let me take you back. Let me take you to where this actually begins. My name before the government changed it was Marcus Devon Arnett. I was born in Macon, Georgia, on the 14th of September 1971. My father was a mechanic. He died when I was 8 in a 2-car accident on I-75, coming home from a job in Warner Robins. My mother raised me and my younger sister alone on a nurse's aide salary and a faith in God that I have never fully matched but have always respected. She was the kind of woman who believed that what you did in private was the true measure of you, that the Lord saw the quiet work, and that was enough. She died in 2011 inches a hospice in Macon. I was not at her bedside. I had not spoken to her in 13 years. That is a sentence I have never said out loud before. I'm saying it now because it is the sentence that explains everything else. I enlisted in the United States Army on July 3, 1989. I was 17 years old. I had graduated from high school 3 weeks earlier, and I had a partial academic scholarship to Albany State that I walked away from because I had wanted, more than anything I had ever wanted, to become someone capable of doing something that mattered. I was selected for the 75th Ranger Regiment in 1991. I was selected for the 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment, what the Army calls Delta Force, in 1993, at the age of 21. That was the youngest selection the unit had recorded at that time. I served 6 combat deployments between 1994 and 1998. On May 3rd, 1998, I led a team of 12 Delta operators in a direct-action hostage rescue at an overrun American diplomatic compound in a small West African nation. The operation had been authorized by the president. We had 14 hours to plan it. We executed it in 19 minutes. We pulled 6 American diplomats and 9 foreign nationals, a total of 15 people out of a compound that had been held for 39 hours by an insurgent faction with automatic weapons and a documented history of executing hostages. We took no American casualties. We eliminated 8 insurgents. We were, for those 19 minutes, the finest group of human beings I have ever been permitted to stand alongside. The operation was classified at the highest level the Defense Department could apply. 3 days after we landed back at base, a colonel I had never met before that morning sat me down at a table at an airfield in North Carolina and told me that the operation was being removed from every accessible government record system, that 22 members of the insurgent network had survived the engagement, that several of them had captured images of me during the operation, that the faction had already circulated those images through networks in Lagos and Dakar and Abidjan, that there was a kill order signed, active, distributed on the American operator who had personally extracted the diplomats. That American operator was me. The colonel told me I had a new name. The name was Raymond Hale. I had a new history, a bachelor's degree from Georgia Southern, a teaching certificate from the state of Georgia, a fabricated rental history, a fabricated employment record, a fabricated reason for never discussing anything prior to the fall of 1998. He told me I had a mother in Macon I needed to call. He told me what to say when I called her. He told me I would mail her a letter drafted by Army Legal. He told me that after the letter, I would not speak to her again. I asked him what would happen to her if I did contact her. He did not answer. I understood the answer. I want you to sit with that for a second. I want you to feel what that moment actually is. You are 26 years old. You have just spent 19 minutes doing something that the President of the United States personally authorized and that saved 15 human lives. And the man across the table from you is telling you that your reward is that you will spend the rest of your life being smaller than you are. You will be a teacher. You will drive used cars. You will never explain yourself. You will smile at parent-teacher conferences in a sport coat from an outlet mall, and you will let the people around you believe that this diminished, carefully constructed fiction is all you ever were or could be. I said yes. I said yes because the colonel had made it clear without ever saying it directly that the people I loved would be in danger if I said anything else. I said yes because I was 26 and trained to follow orders, and because I had not yet understood what 26 years of silence would feel like from the inside. You don't know what a thing costs until you've paid it for a long time. So I became Raymond Hale of East Point, Atlanta. I taught American history to 8th graders at a Title I school in College Park. I coached the JV track team. I drove a 2009 Ford F-150 that I had maintained with the same methodical discipline I had once applied to weapons and equipment. I went to church on Sundays at a small Baptist congregation on Campbellton Road, where nobody asked too many questions and the pastor had a voice that reminded me of my mother's. I was, by every visible measure, an unremarkable man, a quiet man, a boring man. I met Denise in 2001 at a cookout in Decatur. She was 30 years old, a pediatric nurse at Children's Healthcare, the most beautiful and direct woman I had encountered in 3 years of my constructed life. We were married in 2004 at a small ceremony at Fernbank Museum. I told her, on our 3rd date, that I had a complicated past I could not fully discuss. She told me she could live with complicated. She told me she loved the man in front of her. I told her she was only seeing part of him. She said that was enough. For 11 years it was enough. I am not going to tell you our marriage ended because she stopped loving me. I think she loved me, in her way, through most of it. What happened was slower and quieter than a betrayal. It was an erosion. She watched me teach the same subject to teenagers for 18 years. She watched me drive the same truck. She watched other people's lives expand and watched mine hold steady at the same altitude. Same rent, same paycheck, same shoes. She started spending time with Garrison Cole in 2019, at a real estate event in Midtown. He was everything I was not visible as. He was loud in the way money makes people loud. He bought a table at charity dinners. He owned things. She filed for divorce in January of 2023, and I contested nothing because the man I was on paper, Raymond Hale, 8th grade teacher, 12-year-old truck, East Point rental, had no grounds to contest anything. The custody hearing had been scheduled for 6 months. She wanted full physical custody. Her argument was financial and practical. Raymond Hale earned $51,200 a year. Garrison Cole owned $3 million in commercial real estate. The children would have a room each in a Buckhead house. They would have private school. They would have a father figure who could show them what building something looked like. I had a 2-bedroom rental and a savings account with less than $1,000 in it. She was not wrong about the numbers. I need to be honest about that. She was entirely right about the numbers. What she didn't know, what no one in that courtroom knew except me, was that alongside Raymond Hale's $51,200 there existed, in a sealed account at the Department of the Treasury, 22 years of classified hazard differential, missed retirement benefits, and cost of living adjustments belonging to Marcus Devon Arnett, Master Sergeant, United States Army, 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta, a number that a colonel named Patrick Stroud had spoken aloud on my front porch in January of that year, $2.1 million. Colonel Stroud had knocked on my door on a Thursday evening in January. He was in civilian clothes. He told me the declassification timeline on the 1998 operation had been accelerated by 2 years due to an unrelated FOIA disclosure. He told me there were 9 surviving members of the original team. He told me I had been the hardest to find, not because I had been hiding from the government, but because I had been so disciplined in the constructed life the government had given me that I had left almost no searchable trace outside of it. He told me my Distinguished Service Cross had been signed and held in a Pentagon safe since 2003. He told me there was a White House ceremony planned for June. I asked him for 90 days. I told him about the custody hearing in March. I told him I needed to be fully present for my children until that was resolved. He nodded. He said he would respect that. Then he told me he was going to take one liberty, that he was authorized to send a sealed summary of my service record to the presiding judge in the custody case, not operational details, just the fact of my service, my decoration, the existence of the back pay. He told me the judge would open it only if she decided it was relevant to her ruling. He asked if I objected. I thought about it for a long time, standing on my own front porch in East Point. I thought about 22 years of Denise looking at my truck and my paycheck and my sport coat and building a picture of me that was not my fault and not hers, just the natural consequence of a country asking a man to disappear. I thought about my son deciding, over the last year, that he wanted to be more like Garrison Cole than like me. I thought about my daughter crying in the car after pickup. I said, "I don't object, sir." He shook my hand and walked back to his rental car. That was January. It was now the morning of March 15th, and Judge Miriam Osei Bonsu had just asked me whether my family knew about the federal search file. I said, "Your Honor, they do not." She set her hands flat on the desk. She said, "Mr. Hale, the document I have received this morning was transmitted to this court under the authority of the Secretary of Defense and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. It has been transmitted to this court because the federal government has determined that the financial picture being presented to this bench today is materially incomplete." She paused. "This court has been informed that you are owed approximately $2.1 million in classified back compensation from the United States Department of the Treasury." Another pause. "This court has also been informed that you are the recipient of the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest military decoration available to a member of the United States Army for actions conducted under direct presidential authorization in May of 1998. The courtroom went completely silent. I mean that in the most literal way. It wasn't the silence of people choosing not to speak. It was the silence of people who had stopped being able to. The court reporter, a woman in her late 40s who had been transcribing Fulton County family court proceedings for 16 years, had her fingers motionless above her keyboard. She was staring at the judge with the expression of someone who has just heard a sentence that doesn't fit inside any category they've ever used before. Warren Delacroix, my attorney, who had watched me walk into that courtroom every month for a year and said nothing about what I carried, let out one slow exhale through his nose. That was the only sound he made. Denise had frozen at the petitioner's table. Her hand was halfway to her water glass and she had simply stopped moving. Garrison Cole, sitting on the bench directly behind her, had stood up without appearing to realize he had stood up. My son Theo said one word from the bench behind me. He said, "Dad." I did not turn around. I could not turn around. If I had turned around in that moment, 23 years of the only discipline that had ever asked anything real of me would have broken, and I had made a silent, private decision at some point in the preceding decade that my children would never see me break in a room where someone was trying to take them. I kept my eyes on the judge. She cleared the courtroom of everyone except attorneys, the court reporter, and my children. The bailiff led Garrison Cole out by the elbow. He was objecting loudly. The bailiff, a large man who, I noticed, had a ranger tab tattooed on the back of his left forearm, guided him through the door with the gentle, unhurried efficiency of a man who had removed difficult people from rooms before and had opinions about which of them deserved to be there. The doors closed. Judge Osei Bonsu looked at Denise's attorney, a careful, experienced family law specialist named Claudette Marbury, and said, "Counselor, your client may read this document. It is classified at the confidential level. It does not leave this courtroom. She may not discuss its specific contents with her current husband or any party outside these proceedings. She may, after reading it, amend or withdraw any testimony she has offered this court today." She looked at Denise. "Mrs. Cole, the reason you did not know what is in this document is not because this man deceived you. It is because he was prohibited by federal law from telling you. The document will explain what he was carrying." Denise's attorney read it first. Claudette Marbury was the kind of attorney who had constructed her courtroom face over decades into something impenetrable. I had been watching her work for 11 months. I had watched her dismantle witnesses and redirect testimony and flag objections with the emotional temperature of someone reading a grocery list. She read that single page, and her face cracked, just for a moment. Then she slid it across the table to Denise. Denise picked it up with both hands. Her hands were shaking. The paper made a small sound against the table. She read the first section. She inhaled sharply, a small, compressed sound that I had not heard her make in 22 years, including through the births of both of our children. It was the sound of a complete reorganization, not grief exactly. Something older and harder than grief. She read the second section. She put one hand over her mouth. She read the third section through her fingers. Then she started crying, real crying, not performance, not strategy. The kind of crying that happens when the story you have been living inside for 2 decades suddenly revises itself, and you have to feel every scene differently all at once. She cried for 41 minutes. She tried to speak twice and couldn't form the sentence. She tried to apologize around the 20-minute mark, and Claudette touched her arm and shook her head, not cruelly, just professionally, because anything Denise said on the record at that moment would have mattered in ways neither of them could fully map yet. I looked at the window. I looked at the wood grain of the table. I looked at my hands. I thought about my mother in Macon, who died in a hospice room without her son, who had gone to her grave believing I was working private security in a country I had never been to, because a colonel in 1998 had drafted me a letter and asked me to copy it in my own handwriting. I thought about all the Sunday dinners I hadn't been at, all the birthdays I'd sent cards for because showing up in person was a risk I wasn't authorized to take. I did not cry. I was not going to cry in that room, but I want to be clear, not crying in that moment cost me something. If you have ever been in a room where the person who left you finally understands what they didn't know about you, you know something about how that feels. It is not triumphant. I want to tell you it felt like winning, but it felt more like watching a fire finally go out in a house you used to live in. Something was over. Something that had been burning for a long time. That's all. At 11:50, 2 inches the morning, Claudette Marbury stood up. She said, "Your Honor, my client wishes to withdraw her petition for full physical custody. She also wishes to formally amend her testimony from earlier this morning. She wishes to offer an apology to Mr. Hale, for the record, with the understanding that." The judge raised one hand. She said, "Counselor, the court strongly recommends that any personal communication your client wishes to offer be made outside this courtroom, privately, without a court reporter present. The court does not require an apology from your client. What happened here today was a consequence of circumstances that neither party in this courtroom fully controlled. The petition is withdrawn. The existing arrangement stands." I walked out of that courtroom with my 2 children. Theo was 11, Priya was 8. We walked past Garrison Cole in the corridor, sitting on a bench, phone in hand, staring at the doors with an expression that said he had understood approximately 15% of what had just happened and didn't like any of it. We walked past Warren Delacroix, who stood at the elevator bank, looked at me, and gave me a single nod, the specific nod of a man who has served alongside people who don't need to be told they did well. We walked out into the March afternoon. I took them to a Jamaican restaurant called Marsh's on Campbellton Road, which had been our restaurant since Theo was 4 years old. The owner, a stout, magnificent woman from Montego Bay named Miss Vera, had fed my children their entire conscious lives. She hugged them both when we walked in. She asked no questions. She brought oxtail and rice and peas and fried plantains without being asked. My children ate. I did not eat. I drank water with lime and watched them. Midway through the meal, Theo set his fork down. He said, "Dad, was that real?" I said, "Theo." "Yes, every word." He said, "Like you were actually a soldier?" I said, "Yes." He was quiet for a while. Then he said, "Dad, I told Garrison one time that you were the most boring person I knew." He looked at his plate when he said it. I said it to make him laugh. I let that sentence sit for a moment. Then I said, "Theo, look at me." He looked up. I said, "Your mother said what she believed. You said what you saw. Neither of you were lying. You were both working with incomplete information. The reason the information was incomplete was not your fault, and it was not her fault. It was the consequence of a decision made in a room in North Carolina in 1998 by a colonel and a government that had its reasons. None of that is on you." He said, "But Dad, you saved people." I said, "Yes." He said, "How many?" I said, 15, 6 Americans, 9 foreign nationals, and 14 guys on my team who all came home." His eyes filled up. He didn't let them spill over, he had too much of me in him for that, but they filled up. He said, "I want to be like you when I grow up." I said, "Theo, you already are like me. That's the whole problem and the whole gift." Priya had been listening to all of this. She put her small hand on top of mine on the table. She said, "Dad, I knew you weren't boring." I said, "How did you know?" She said, "Because boring people are loud about it. They always need you to know how interesting they are. You never needed anybody to know anything about you. That's different." She said it with the complete certainty of an 8-year-old who has arrived at a truth she does not yet have the vocabulary to fully express, but does not need to. I left a 60% tip at Marcia's. Miss Vera hugged me on the way out and held on for a long moment without saying anything, and I understood she had been watching my posture for 9 years, and had known something was in there that didn't match the truck and the sport coat, and had never asked because some things deserve to be carried in private until they don't. I called Colonel Stroud at 7 that evening. I told him the petition had been withdrawn. I told him I was ready to begin the formal process. He said he would be in Atlanta the following afternoon. He said the ceremony at the White House was confirmed for the first Saturday in June. He said 9 of us would be there. 2 decorations would be accepted posthumously by widows. He said the president had asked him to convey a personal expression of regret on behalf of the nation that I had waited this long for what I had earned. I said, "Sir, with respect, the president shouldn't feel regret. He should feel proud. The country that asked me to be quiet for 26 years is the same country that finally opened that envelope in a courtroom when my kids were sitting in the room. That's not a failure. That's a debt being honored. There's a difference." Stroud was quiet for a moment. He said, "Master Sergeant, I will tell him exactly that. I want to tell you briefly what happened to Garrison Cole, because you deserve a clean ending and because it is genuinely relevant to what this story is about." In the 5th week after the hearing, federal agents from the IRS Criminal Investigation Division and the FBI arrested Garrison Cole at his Buckhead office. He was charged with 10 counts of tax fraud, 4 counts of wire fraud, and 2 counts of structuring financial transactions to conceal income sources. The investigation had been running for over 2 years. It had nothing to do with me, nothing to do with Denise, nothing to do with the custody hearing. It had to do with the fact that Garrison Cole had been moving approximately $11 million through shell entities in his commercial portfolio over 6 years to avoid federal tax liability, and the government had quietly been building the case the entire time he had been sitting in Buckhead driving a $100,000 car and telling my son I was boring. He would plead guilty. He would receive a federal sentence. The Buckhead house would be seized. The cars would be auctioned. The portfolio would be untangled by receivers over the course of 18 months. Denise called me in May from a parking lot in Sandy Springs. She asked, in a voice I hadn't heard since the early years of our marriage, whether she could come home. I told her the truth gently and completely. I told her the house she remembered had been real. I told her the man in it was still the same man. I told her that man was not going to be her husband again, not because I didn't love her, but because the version of our marriage that had existed had been built on a foundation of federal silence, and I was not willing to reconstruct it on that same ground. I told her I was going to make sure she was stable. I told her I was going to keep the co-parenting arrangement. I told her I forgave her, and I meant it, not as a performance, but as a practical act of self-preservation, because I was 52 years old, and I had already spent 26 years carrying something the country had asked me to carry, and I had no intention of spending the next 26 carrying her guilt too. Forgiveness isn't absolution. It's just how you put something down. In June, I traveled to Washington with my 2 children, my younger sister B, who had finally been told the full truth in April, in a 4-hour phone call I will not write about, because some conversations belong only to the people in them, and an elderly woman from Macon named Dorothy Pullens, who had been my mother's closest friend at the church on Napier Avenue, and who had asked me 3 weeks earlier, very quietly, if she could come to the ceremony in place of my mother. I said yes. I would have said yes 1,000 times. 9 of us received the Distinguished Service Cross in the East Room of the White House. 2 decorations were accepted by widows at a separate, private ceremony that morning. The president spoke for 12 minutes. He spoke about the 19 minutes in 1998. He spoke about the 6 Americans in the basement of that compound. He spoke about the decision, made in silence by a government that was doing its imperfect best, to ask the men who had executed that rescue to pay for its secrecy with the currency of their own legibility, to be unseen so that others could be safe. He pinned the medal to the dress uniform the Pentagon had tailored for me the week before, because the last time I'd worn Army dress greens I had weighed 34 pounds less. When the ceremony was over, Theo stood against the east wall of the room in a navy suit my sister had bought him in Macon, and he saluted me. He had been practicing the salute for 17 days. I know this because Priya had texted me a video of him practicing it in the bathroom mirror at Denise's apartment. It was a perfect salute. I returned it. Priya walked across the room in a white dress, took my hand, and stood next to me for the photograph. That photograph is now in a frame I paid $11 for at a Target in East Point. It hangs above the fireplace in my rental house, 6 blocks from my children's school. Next to the photograph hangs the Distinguished Service Cross. It is October now, 7 months since the hearing. The back pay from the Treasury has been transferred into a protected account in my name. I have paid off the truck. I have funded college accounts for both children. I have donated $250,000 to an organization that provides college scholarships to the children of fallen Special Operations personnel. I am still renting the house on the quiet street in East Point. I am still teaching American history to 8th graders at a Title I school in College Park, Georgia. I have not resigned. I have applied to teach a new elective next year, a semester course on the history of American Special Operations, open to juniors and seniors. The principal told me in our meeting last week that she expects it to fill within hours of registration opening. Theo sat on the back deck with me 2 Sundays ago and asked me quietly whether he was allowed to think about enlisting someday. I said, Theo, you are allowed to think about anything you want. You are also allowed to change your mind every year until you're 30. The Army is not the only way to serve. Being a good father is a way to serve. Being a good teacher is a way to serve. Being the kind of person other people can rely on, that is a form of service nobody gives you a medal for, but it matters just as much. He nodded. Then he said, Dad, I think I want to teach history. I was quiet for a long moment. Then I said, Theo, that is a fine thing to want. He said, I want to teach it the way you do. I said, the way I teach it is the way a man teaches something he was forced to live inside of for a very long time. If you want to teach it that way, you're going to need to earn that. You've got time. He hugged me. He hugged me the way he had hugged me when he was 5, and had scraped his knee on the driveway, and needed both the bandage and the reassurance that the world was still a reasonable place. He is 11 now, 12 in December. He still needs both. I intend to make sure he gets them for as long as I am standing. There is a kind of man that this country has asked for a very long time to be quiet, to carry the biggest things they have ever carried in the smallest container they can manage, to smile at school pickup and drive used trucks and let people who don't know them build entire narratives about their inadequacy. Some of those men are still out there right now, teaching your children, sitting across from you at church, passing you in the grocery store. They are not boring. They are not failures. They are just waiting for the morning a sealed envelope lands on the right desk at the right time. Mine landed on a Wednesday morning in March, in front of my children, 26 years late, right on time. Here's what I want to ask you before you go, and I am genuinely asking, not as a script, but as a man who spent a long time in silence, wondering if anyone else has ever felt this. If someone who called you a failure for years finally saw the full picture of who you are, would you want them to apologize? Or would you want them to simply have to live with knowing what they missed? Drop your answer in the comments. I'm going to read everyone. And if you have ever been the person in the room that nobody could fully see, tell me about it. Because that is the conversation I actually want to have. If this story moved you in any direction toward anger, toward something quieter, please consider subscribing. I tell stories like this one every week because I believe the people who carry the most are almost never the people who talk the loudest. And those stories deserve to be heard. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Atlanta, Georgia, to create original content. Any resemblance to real people, living or deceased, or to actual events is entirely coincidental.